Well, hello and welcome to this China Masterclass webinar. My name is Paul Sutton, and in case you're new to this series, the focus of this series of webinars is all about how to create long-term trust relationships and value in the China market, and focusing in particular on the real estate sector. So I'm going to hand over to my co-host Sally Meyer Yip, who is the founder of 11K Consulting. She's also an expert on China PR and brand building. And I'm going to ask Sally to introduce our special guest today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And thank you so much, our special guest speaker joining us from Ireland today, who is Wei Palmer-Smith. Wei is a real expert in all aspects of property developments, from residential development design to marketing and sales. Wei has over 20-year experience in the property world, including on several world-renowned developments. Working at director level in estate agency for more than a decade, Wei then worked in-house with a number of developers, such as sales and creative director of Manhattan North Corporation in London, where he was instrumental to the design and sale of many high-profile residential, retail, and commercial developments. And at the moment, Wei, joining us from Ireland to date, has been the head of LifeRank New Homes in Ireland for the past 3 years, and has successfully launched and managed over 100 residential transactions. In the last 30 months, over 30 projects. So I would say this is pretty much amazing and impressive. So today is really to get all the good insights from Wei to talk about how residential developers can position their developments for the Chinese and Asia Pacific market. So without further ado, I would love to ask Wei the first question. And thanks a lot for having us again. So how are residential developers or house builders adapting the design or specification of their developments to suit the Chinese and Asia Pacific markets? And what do you see as the trends in the next few years? Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me start by saying thank you very much for having me as a guest today. I very much appreciate it, the opportunity to be able to discuss this with you and obviously present to your audience as well. So I guess the way that developers have been adapting to specifically to the Chinese and Asian markets has changed quite a lot over the last kind of, I guess, decade that I've been quite heavily involved in working with a lot of Asian and specifically Chinese clients. Previously, there was a very big trend with developers who were trying to almost sort of replicate what buyers might have been used to seeing in China or in other countries. And I think we're starting to see people moving away from that a little more, because we're also twinned with that. We're seeing development within China changing a lot as well, and picking up a lot of Western trends. So I think in terms of where the market is, we're actually becoming much more of we're adopting much more of a kind of cohesive global taste and requirement as we all travel way much more, and we get used to seeing different ways of living, different layouts, different designs, and I think quite a lot of maybe some of the earlier mistakes that were made by property developers and by agents was to kind of lean too much into trying to almost replicate stuff. And I think when somebody is looking, and we certainly see this a lot from our clients, when we have a Chinese client who's looking to buy in London or Dublin or New York, then part of the reason for buying is that they want to buy into that lifestyle and that experience. So I think where we're seeing the biggest adaptation now is in customer service, and also in making the way that we communicate and also the overall process as easy as it possibly can be. So embracing what the different requirements might be for buyers, and trying to see whether or not we can just make the entire process a lot smoother and a lot easier. So part of, I guess, what we've definitely done as a team, it's something that Knight Frank make full use of WeChat, and getting as many of our team. And it sounds like something that should be very basic and really simple, but it's actually. It's not. It's taken a long time, I think, to have everybody just embrace that. There's a very simple way of communicating that makes life much, much easier for clients. And once we can actually get on board with that, and we're able to work with that as a method of communication, then it makes everything so much easier. We also work very, very closely with our teams in China. So. I myself regularly, I mean, obviously COVID has meant quite a lot of restrictions, but I travel to China regularly as well, along with different members of my team. And part of that is so that we can also learn in greater detail what the additional requirements are of clients, but also to be able to go and really have sort of periods of talking through in detail, in person, because whilst we obviously have all been under a lot of restrictions and having to do everything virtually, certainly over the last sort of 12 or 14 months, there's nothing quite like being able to sit across from somebody and really just answer all of the questions that they might have, give them a level of comfort, and help to guide them through the process. So we do that as much as possible. And we also, in addition to us traveling to China, we also bring a lot of our team who are based in China to Ireland on a fairly regular basis to come and view any projects that we have. So they also can have that same experience with buyers in person, where they can talk people through in detail.
Okay, but maybe I can sort of drill down a bit more on that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
Supposing you're taking on a new developer client for the first time,
yeah,
and the brief is to help create a strategy for attracting more Chinese or APAC buyers for their units. What are the different areas that you would look at with that developer in terms of building that strategy and building that process with them?
So again, I guess where we would start from a marketing perspective is accessibility. Is can we make this as easy for everybody to understand and accessible as possible? So very early on in the process, we actually start working with our teams, our Asia Pacific teams, early on in the process with a developer. So even when site acquisition has just been made and they're in the process of designing something, we will actually reach out to colleagues to have additional input in terms of specific requirements that may be for specific locations, and identifying not only our target markets domestically, but also our target markets internationally. And it's part of the service that we do as part of the consultation period that we would do with any developer during the design stage on a development. But what we're trying to do now is to take a much more holistic approach to what we're actually designing to meet what the market demand is, trying to pick up on any changes that there may have been in terms of market demand. So for example, one of the things that we do very successfully as a company, our research team are constantly monitoring what trends are in the market, what maybe changes and requirements are, and we've seen some very big changes happen. We've seen some very big changes happen over the last 15 months since we've all been going through some pretty major lockdowns and life changes. And we've seen that both with people living in the same city, people looking to maybe change to live into a different city, people moving out from center of town, people wanting to move closer into the center of town, but also within buildings themselves where people have just different requirements in how they need to live. So globally, we have a lot more people who are currently working from home. Now, whether that trend continues or not is another thing, but there's that creates then a shift in requirements, where somebody may have been happy to work from the kitchen table on the 1 day a month they were working from home. Then, much like yourself, Paul, if you're happy to continue working from home, then that means you probably need an office space, and actually the kitchen table just doesn't cut it anymore. So we monitored that not only domestically, but we also monitored that globally, because obviously we're a global property consultancy, and we do very much work with those international teams. As far as kind of marketing is concerned, we've picked up obviously a lot. We have very good relationships in the different various countries where we're based, and I think what we try to do as well is to adapt to whatever the individual market's requirements are. So with our developers here in Ireland, then we will talk them through how people like to be marketed to, and how they like to receive information. So obviously that will involve communication through WeChat. It will involve in some instances advertising through WeChat, working with PR firms who are really connected, and we're currently in the process of working actually with Sally and her team on a project that we're about to launch. And it's interesting because what we're trying to then do is bring in the right experts for the different locations that we're working in, and that's really important from our perspective. We also we do different language brochures as well. So we will often produce brochures both in English and in Chinese. And particularly for Ireland, one of the key demographics for us in Ireland are people who are going through the immigrant investor program. So we work very closely with quite a lot of the different stakeholders who are involved in that process. So we'll work very closely with immigration firms. So we'll do presentations through immigration firms. We work very closely with Bartra Asset Management, who are very big in the region, who actually are a subsidiary of an Irish company, and who look after the investment side. So the way that we'll market a project has a variety of different angles to it, but that's what we then, right from the start, we work with our developers here on what are the best ways for us to reach the customer that we want to reach, and in a way that is appealing to the customer as well.
Yes, it's really interesting. I mean, when I think back to my time in China in 2019 and my experience of the local developers there, it seemed their main marketing strategy was literally grabbing people off the street, putting them in buckets, taking them over to the sort of the demonstration, the show home or show flat or the development, and basically doing that whole tour. So you mentioned already things like WeChat and relationships with local partners, as it were. But how would you see that kind of strategy applied to marketing an Irish development or a UK development in China?
So it's very successful for us, I think, because it's a form of direct marketing that allows us to get right into our potential customer's hand immediatay. And it also, we as consumers, I think, all over the world, I remember when I was a kid, if you take television, for example, you just watched the channel that was on because you didn't want to get up and have to change it. So now we flick through channels because we have so much more choice, but also we don't have to move. We can change the channel from our phone. And I think there's loads of changes in technology have meant that we now, our expectations are, we have a much shorter attention span, but we like to get a reply to whatever question we have immediately. And what's great about WeChat is that it allows us to be able to both market to the consumer, but also for the consumer to be able to engage directly with us on the same platform and have a reply straight away from somebody involved in the project. And I think that's one of the really key elements to how we're able to do this, is kind of keeping everything in a way that's very user friendly for our customers. And then it allows us obviously to be able to loop in. So we will often, over the course of a transaction, you start a conversation with a representative for one of the buyers, then we'll loop in one of our local agents. We might loop in a solicitor that we're recommending to the client to use. And then before you know it, we have a dozen different people who are all on the same conversation. And it's great because it means that it's a very transparent process. People feel like they can include lots of different family members in it. And for example, during because of the travel restrictions that we've had during lockdown, we do a lot of video calls through WeChat as well. And I did a tour of a property fairly recently with a client on WeChat, where he started the tour and we got through, I think, 2 rooms, and he was really liking it. And he said, "Okay, hold on one second. I'm gonna get my daughters on this as well." So then we had to stop and go back to the front door and start again. And that's great because his daughters were both in completely different cities from he was in, but it enabled him to be able to get in contact with them immediately, and then the entire family could then watch the tour of this property and see whether it was going to be suitable for them or not. And I think that really helps us a lot in terms of just the versatility of it as a platform. It works incredibly well for us, and I think it's taken the place of maybe where you might have used lots of different methods across the transaction. Now it allows us to be able to kind of pull everything together. And it's taken a period of education, certainly for a lot of people in Ireland, to get used to working with the platform as well. But it's a very, very useful marketing tool for us.
And I get, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, it has huge benefits in terms of immediacy, but it does require the team to be very much aligned in terms of, you know, how to handle these things. Maybe I can hand back to Sally in terms of, you mentioned that you were working together on, or about to work together on, a particular project, and you know, so what are the different aspects that you would look at in terms of developing the PR strategy alongside Ray for a specific developer?
Yes, so thank you. I love your insights, Ray, and I love the fact that you love WeChat.
I do. I'm a WeChat addict. Yes,
sometimes I know that some clients feel so daunting. Oh, a new app, I don't know how to use it. I say, if you can use WhatsApp, you can use WeChat. Absolutely. So it's not as daunting as people think. So back to your question, Paul, regarding marketing a new development to the Chinese audience. I think at the end of the day, it's still about the trusted brand, that the buyers need to feel that they can trust this developer, that they will complete the development, they will have enough funding and do it properly. So again, from our marketing perspective, is to really build that trusted image between the developer, the project, with the end buyers. But that it means being feasible to be seen on those trusted media platform, such as Forbes China, Shanghai Daily, depends on which city, what kind of project, so that people think, oh, you are commenting on certain things in those media that I trust, and then be feasible, like what you said, Wei, on WeChat, so that they do know that you are serious about us, that you are on WeChat, and then be engaging, know what they are talking about, whether it is about sustainability, about well-being, and be really on top of it, know what they want. So again, it's a consistent messages seeding to the audience through the right media platform, online as well as offline. Don't forget the offline elements as well, as you said, to be making that personal relationship when we can. That will really go a long way.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm thinking back to these. We used to have a little hobby of, we would go to these show places even though we weren't planning to buy anything at the time. So this is back in China, and I remember one of them in particular, before they showed us anything about the development, there was the story as to the developer, you know, the history, the values, and all that kind of stuff. And I guess, you know, to some extent you're replicating that experience, albeit not in person in all cases. Sunny, I know that you had a question about you know, specific examples of developers in this space who are doing things well.
Yeah, so Wei, if you can actually tell us some examples of developers that you think they are doing really well with the Chinese and Asian buyers? And what do you think about their secret success? What are the success? If you can tell us one or two secrets.
Yeah, so I think now there are a number of developers who are performing very, very well in the Chinese market. I think probably one of the standouts and certainly a very, very well established brand now is Ballymore. And whilst they're a huge developer in the UK, they actually are an Irish developer, and I think they've done a number of different things that have been incredibly successful, but also have just helped to underpin them as a legitimate powerhouse as far as property development is concerned. But also, and I guess this is exactly what Sally was touching on just there, is that they are seen as a very trusted brand, that they are incredibly reliable, they do what they say they're going to do, and also that they value their customers, and that's at that really is at the core of everything that they do. And I think one of the kind of secrets of how they've been able to achieve that is that they put the same amount of effort into every different region that they operate in, as far as engaging with the consumers. So they very early on in the process of working with in Asia Pacific and working with buyers from that region, they then acquired a team directly within the region. And I think that's a really important part of how they continue to perform at the top of the game, because they actually they have people on the ground within the region, and that's a massive level of comfort. So they managed to pivot the brand into basically operating effectively 24 hours a day. There's always somebody that you can speak to at Ballymore if you have a question. There's always going to be somebody available to speak to you in your language, and the fact that they do work so well in terms of building the story as well. And I think that's something that Ballymore have done really well, is they are more than happy to educate you about Ballymore and who Ballymore are, as well as the apartment that you may be interested in buying. But they also then follow it through with excellent customer care. And I think one of the things that you can see from a brand like Ballymore is that they have a lot of repeat business as well. So people, once they've done one transaction with them, will continue to do more transactions with them. And I think you don't really get a better endorsement than that, in the fact that they're prepared to do that. So I think, yeah, they're really interesting. I think for me, they're a really interesting example of how to do that very, very well. They also have worked to, I guess, adapt designs to work. They listen, as we do too. And I think it's what I was saying earlier. You're not just considering a narrow market for your project. You're actually thinking about the wider global market, in terms of when you put pen to paper on that first sketch you do about what the building might be like. And I think it's a really crucial part of Ballymore's success in how they've been able to achieve what they have.
That's really interesting. So if I'm trying to sort of recap on the secret sauce for Ballymore, it sounds like it's a combination of, continuing to build a brand story. It's about having the local team in the region, so in APAC, and the sort of 24/7 availability, Chinese language availability, plus the commitment to customer care, the ongoing customer experience.
Absolutely, and I think there's also there's a consistency within the brand as well. So it's funny, because if you look at Ballymore's projects overall, there are vast differences between the different projects that they do, but there's also a level of consistency and familiarity that you'll have across everything as well. And I think that they always have their brand identity is always very, very present in everything that they do. that's across every project that they do. And I think that's something as well that really helps, because again, as Sally was saying, like, it's really important to build that level of trust, and not only in terms of the fact that the developer has sufficient funding and that the development is actually going to come to fruition if you're buying off plan, but even beyond that, adding in as well, am I going to get what it is I think I've just agreed to buy? And I think that's a really important part of building that trust as well, and it's why they get so much repeat business.
Yeah, interesting. I'm going to move on to our final question, but before we wrap up, which is, given everything we talked about, Ray, what do you see as the major opportunities for developers in Ireland, maybe also in UK, to the extent that you can comment on that, in terms of accessing the Chinese market, the APAC market?
So I think if we start with the UK, I think there's now a well-established both immigration and investor market in the UK with Chinese buyers, and I think that's something that we as a company, we've worked a very, very long time. We have a huge team based in China, and we have a great deal of success working with most of the world's top developers, and I think that we're already seeing that's already very, very well established, and it's working very well. I think continuing to build those relationships, the challenge probably over the next year or two is really just trying to kind of get things back into the way that people like to work, more in-person meetings, and really expanding our network that we have there. I think the challenge for Ireland is a little bit different. So we started a kind of our proper full engagement for Irish property being marketed in China only about just over 3 years ago. And so there's a period of for us, and I guess it's a challenge of any kind of perceived new market going into the region, is a period of education, and really a period of, and that's why it's so important that we work with people like Sally and her team, because we have not only to market the product that we're doing, but we're also, as part of that process, we're also selling Dublin, we're selling Ireland, and there's a period of education around that as well. So we as a company decided, and some of our developer clients as well, decided quite early on that we wanted to invest the time. And it's why I personally have spent so much time myself in China, doing a series of different conferences and presentations, doing one-to-one meetings with clients. And I think what we identified over the last 3 years, one of the biggest opportunities right now is through the Immigrant Investor Program, and for us being able to make the process as smooth as possible for people. So we make ourselves available within that. We also try and facilitate as much as possible people being able to access our market, access our properties through whichever medium they want, and that they don't experience unnecessary language barriers, and also that we're able to just have very, very simple, straightforward processes to be able to help people coming through. And I think it's one of those things that you can't just turn it on straight away. It is actually years of worth of work to get to that point. So we're now at a point now where we have a regular, steady supply of clients who are inquiring through our teams in China and being directly referred across to us. And that has taken a long time to get to that point where we now have a steady flow of clients who are coming to us from China.
So, just to check, so my understanding of what you said in terms of what is the opportunity, the opportunity for developers is, well, clearly, the demographic in terms of Chinese appetite for investment, you just can't deny. So it's a continuing trend. And the opportunity is, well, it is possible to stand out, or at least be amongst the top tier of developers, just by making that commitment to building the brand, building the communications, that smoothness of process to make it
absolutely. And there are trailblazing brands like sort of Ballymore or Berkeley Homes who've been very, like, they've done a lot of groundwork previously, and I think there are some very clear examples of the level of engagement and that is required really to be able to make yourself one of those top players. So the world is your oyster as far as developers are concerned with the Irish property market and Chinese consumer, but it does take quite a lot of work, and there has to be that level of commitment.
Yeah. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we've just about run out of time. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much, Ray. I mean, so many key messages that we've had here. You know, one of them is just the need to refine, or the need for developers to refine their design requirements, the design specifications to match how things are developing in China. And one example you gave, Ray, was just the home working example. What does that mean? Does that mean specific office facilities within each unit or whatever? We talked about the basics as we were just touching on now in terms of brand building, long-term investment, accessibility, 24/7 culture, embracing WeChat, creating long-term campaigns across the different media, you know, as Sally would support on. Finally, we just recapped on the opportunity, you know, because from the perspective of smaller developers, you know, a lot of the larger ones have done that trailblazing work already. So, you know, that to some extent, smaller developers, medium-sized ones can benefit from that, but it's still a long-term commitment.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Sally to close things off and to remind people as to how they can reach out if they have any comments, feedback, or suggestions.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Wei, for your most valuable insights. I'm sure all of us learned something new from you today, so thank you so much. So for our audience today, thank you for making time to listen to this webinar. And if you do like it, please do share and drop us an email at ChinaMasterclass@11kconsulting.com. If there are any speakers that you would like us to interview, please do let us know as well. And very soon we will be having another one. So see you all very soon. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.